Joining us now, former Democratic Senator Barbara Boxer from California, Brendan Buck, former press secretary, John Boehner, and Paul Ryan, and Tara Dowdell, a Democratic strategist. So Tara, Trump's first decision after, winning was naming Susie Wiles as his chief of staff. What do you see in that?
Well, it's interesting because I do see some identity politics for the party that rejects it. I think part of what gave her an advantage is the fact that she is also a woman, in addition to she ran a campaign that won. She ran a winning campaign, but she also is a woman, and Trump knows that he does have weakness there. So I see that as part of the calculus.
How do you see some of the calculus that went into both the Trump campaign and the Harris campaign? And where do you think that calculus was successful? And where was that calculus unsuccessful?
Well, I part company, as someone who's worked on a lot of campaigns, I part company with some of what the hand-wringing and the finger-pointing that's happening on the Democratic Party side. I think that the campaign was a well-run campaign. I think, objectively speaking, it was a well-run campaign. But it was a campaign that was run within just a little over 100 days. Right. So to run an effective campaign in 100 days, to define yourself when you've been playing second fiddle the entire time and no one really knows what the vice president does, really in any administration, right? So to have that short runway is not helpful. Also, I think Vice President Harris was treated like an incumbent. Despite having limited power and authority, she was treated like she had power and authority by the voters. And then lastly, I think inflation, immigration, I part company there too. That's a global phenomenon. Countries around the world are seeing a rejection of the incumbents, not just here in the United States. Just like inflation is high here, we've done better than the rest of the world. It's high everywhere. It's $17 for a hamburger in the capital of Ethiopia.
And Senator, I'm just thinking, Trump talking about with Kristen Welker about that his mass deportation plan has, quote, no price tag. What do you see that looking like?
Ugly. So ugly and sick. And, I'm in a border state. In this state, we're going to be the loyal opposition. And, I just want to say to the folks out there, I hope you'll give me this chance.
Of course.
He had a stinging loss. There's no sugarcoating it. And I want to say I was humbled because I thought we would win with our message of optimism. I did not think the American people, just take this border issue, wants to see families torn apart. And our governor has already stepped up and said, we're going to protect our laws and the rights of our people. So there is going to be an opposition. When Trump does the right thing, we'll all be saying wonderful. But if it goes into the dark, dark corners that he suggested, there are going to be voices, even though diminished in numbers in the Senate. I've been there when there were only 45 Democrats, and we made our way back because we were truth tellers. But anyway, I really appreciate your giving me that opportunity.
No. And I want to actually kind of get a little bit more into this conversation, if I could, because, stinging loss, the message of optimism, I'm just using what you're just saying, was not the successful one. Is there, do you think, a possibility in 2024, or I should say 2025, come January of 2025, for there to be a period of what traditionally in politics we have called the honeymoon phase? Is there a honeymoon phase possible with Donald Trump?
That's up to Donald Trump. I mean, he knows what it means to families to fear being split up. He understands that. I'm sure he does, although he doesn't have too much compassion. I think he can be told that. If he decides that he is going to reach out and do some things for the people that did leave us, it wasn't a realignment so much as that we lost our numbers in terms of working people and some Black voters and Hispanic voters. If he decides he wants to truly change from being this dark figure to being an optimistic figure, we'll all welcome it. We will all welcome it. But if he goes down those corridors, it's not going to be soft. It's not going to be quiet.
Brendan, I'm just thinking of the many discussions that at the time Speaker Boehner was confronted with on, for example, comprehensive immigration reform. Paul Ryan certainly had a little bit of that, but Boehner certainly dealt with that and was unable, if not maybe unwilling, at least unable to deal with that issue within his own party, within his own caucus. Is there anything that what you saw this past Tuesday could give Republicans, if they do pick up the House, but in the Senate and at the White House, any possibility of what the senator was saying about being more humane?
I don't think there's any appetite in the Republican Party for what we were talking about in 2014 to the 2017 area, talking about how to deal with the people who are here, path to citizenship, earned right, all of those things. That's out the door, I think, at this point. The immigration is obviously central to Republican politics today, but it's all about enforcement. And I think how Donald Trump handles that issue early on is going to be very much defining of his term. We know that he's talking about a mass deportation. I think everybody, Democrats, need to recognize that Donald Trump ran on immigration because it was working for him. It was popular to talk about being really strong on immigration. However, there are limitations, of course, on what he can do, and how he handles this, I think, could have a real impact on his, his legacy. We are still in a democracy. One of the limiting factors in democracy is popularity, small p politics. If Donald Trump overreaches in a way, people think, let's get rid of people who aren't here legally, and hey, that sounds good. But if you start seeing it in a very different way, if you're ripping families apart, that overreach could be extremely unpopular. Look, Donald Trump, we know anything about him. He's in politics for the glorification of himself. He wants to be really, really popular. And if he starts doing things that he sees are very unpopular, I think he's going to have a very different view on how he approaches this.
And Tara, I want to talk about if federal officials are now investigating racist text messages that targeted black people, especially college students, but there were some high school kids that also got these, and the messages say they have been chosen to be picked up and brought to plantations. I'm just wondering, this grotesque nature of, I don't even know how to describe it, but what does it tell us about what the national discourse is currently, and is there any possibility of changing from the grotesque to at least the respectful?
Donald Trump has a history of division. I mean, going back to the Central Park Five, going back to housing discrimination, wanting to have a blacks versus whites season of The Apprentice, to actually bearing that out in his campaign. He, because he's a good salesman, he did a good job of harnessing racial resentment while at the same time talking to some of the very voters that the racial resentment was being weaponized against and telling them a completely different story. So I don't see that changing because one thing that Donald Trump is consistent with his actions. And so those actions have been consistent throughout his life and career, and to the extent that he can leverage racial resentment to continue to dominate because he won leveraging it, so why would he stop?